Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gapesty here. This is the tank guide for both Heroic and Normal Twin Ogron. And this fight is very simple. It's a very close second in difficulty, just behind Kargath Bladefist, who's slightly easier, but only a little bit. The difficulty for tanking itself varies based on which of the bosses you're assigned to tank. From very easy, if you're assigned to pole, to moderately easy if you're assigned to Phemos. So nothing too fancy in either case. So the first thing to understand for tanks in particular is the fierce disposition buff that both the bosses will have throughout the fight, and how that relates to the distance that the bosses are apart from one another. So because they're twins, they love each other so much, they just don't want to be apart at all. And the further apart you pull them, the higher their fierce disposition becomes. This will increase their attack speed, so damage on you as a tank, as well as their casting speed or haste, so that their abilities when they use them will be quicker and more difficult to avoid for the raid as a whole. So, generally speaking, you and your tank partner will want to keep the twins on top of one another, as you see here, throughout the majority of the fight. There are only a few particular instances where they should be apart, and while they're apart, they should be the minimum distance that you can. And again, we'll talk about those in a second. So that's the basic fierce disposition mechanic, but for the most part, it will not come into play because you'll be tanking them on top of one another. So for this video, I will assume that your raid is using a moderately similar strategy to what we are doing. That is, you're tanking somewhere along the outside edge of the room rather than in the center dark gray circle that's in the middle. The reason for this positioning is to help the raid avoid about half of the potential fire that could target you, or not target you, but could come near you. So, to that end, if you're tanking Phemos, the more difficult of the two, you should be aware of the few basic abilities and how they relate to his energy level. The most important for a tank is Whirlwind, which you see he's casting on the right side right now. And this is cast at 33 energy for Phemos. While he's casting this, he is mobile, so he will follow the tank if you're tanking him. Therefore, because Whirlwind is so dangerous to the rest of the raid, it's your job as the Phemos tank to pull Phemos out of the raid prior to him hitting 33 energy and using Whirlwind, and then keep him out of the raid until the Whirlwind is over, and then you can move him back in. So for our raid, we have a monk tank doing that. Generally, it's preferable to have the tank with the highest movement capability to be on Phemos for that reason. But essentially, he pulls Phemos out around 20 energy or so. That gives him enough time to slowly make his way to a safety location while he's dodging the waves of fire that are coming in always at that time period as well. So the Phemos tank's primary job is to watch the energy level, and when it approaches 20 or so, start pulling the boss out around 30 to 40 yards away, because Whirlwind is a pretty large radius. And once in that position, then prepare for the Whirlwind and just stay there soaking it up. And don't be afraid to use personal cooldowns. You also may want to request a healer to move out slightly with you. So that's the role that I've been playing for our raid, is moving out to heal our monk tank while Whirlwind is going on. So there you can see it happening there. And that's pretty much the primary movement requirement for all the tanks, for both tanks in the entire fight. The other two abilities for Phemos, which you can still see on the screen there, Enfeebling Roar is a small, about 20-yard radius debuff that's cast around Phemos. And you will actually want everyone in the raid to get hit by this, because the more people that are hit, the weaker the effect is overall. Whereas if you are by yourself, for example, say you were out tanking Whirlwind and you didn't come back in time and he cast Enfeebling Roar, if it only hits you as a tank, you'll take 300% extra damage for 300 seconds. So you'll probably just screw yourself. But if you distribute the Enfeebling Roar debuff to the entire raid, it's far weaker, around 20 to 30 seconds for 20 to 30% damage taken. And then Quake Blaze is just damage to the raid plus the weapons that are thrown that shoot out the fire. which again, you should try to dodge because the damage stacks up pretty quickly. Now, meanwhile, if you're assigned to tank Pole, this is a very simple job. You're essentially going to keep him in one spot the entire time, with the majority of the raid in that location. So at least the melee will always be stacked up behind the boss, and you'll of course be in front. Typically, you will want to face Pole toward the ranged group, and depending on your raid strategy, your ranged group may choose to be out of melee range, just a few yards. So if that's the case, like I said, just face Pole in that direction. The reason for this is that Pole's shield charge ability, which he uses at 33 energy, as you see there, always prefers to target a player at range. So if your melee are all stacked up in melee range, but your ranged are all stacked up outside of melee range, this forces the charge to go toward the range group. So you always know when he casts it where he's going to go, and you can just sidestep to avoid it. The interrupting shout shouldn't really have an impact on you as a tank. It just interrupts casts. And then pulverize, likewise, shouldn't really impact you. There are 3 short casts during pulverize that all have different effects. The first one is a small AE based on the target location of all the players in the raid. So in other words, if everyone's clumped up, everyone will take a little bit of damage from everyone else. So it's actually a significant amount. But again, you're not going to want to move as a tank because you would be adjusting the raid's position inadvertently. So you would just stay stationary for the pulverize first cast and the second cast. The third cast is a giant rock animation. You can't miss it. You might want to sidestep that a little bit. The damage it deals is based on the distance from the center you are. So if you can move a few yards to take a little bit less damage, then do so, and then move back into position after that's over. The last thing to briefly mention is that tanks need to be sure to avoid opposing abilities. And what I mean by this is there are 2 instances, one for each boss, of being hit by their abilities will cause a debuff that makes you take significantly more damage from the other opposing boss's ability. So if you are tanking Phemos, you will get hit by Whirlwind, of course, and this causes a debuff that makes you take extra damage from Pole. On the other hand, if you're tanking Pole and you get hit by a shield charge, you'll take extra damage from Phemos. This should never be a problem because obviously the tank on Phemos is the only tank that should be taking Whirlwind hits, and shield charge ideally can be avoided by both tanks, but more importantly, it should never hit the tank on Phemos. So as long as you A, dodge shield charge no matter which tank you are, or B, you don't get hit by Whirlwind, if you're tanking Pole, then it'll be fine. You don't have to worry about it. But if you accidentally get that crossover going, then you will need to use cooldowns until the debuffs are gone. And that should cover it. Like I said, it's a very simple fight. Really, it's just a matter of watching the energy levels and moving when appropriate for Phemos. And on Pole, just watching the shield charge and keeping him with the raid. That's about it. So, that is the Normal and Heroic Tank Guide for Twin Ogron. As always, good luck, thanks for watching, and see you next time.